Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nature Source Care. My name is Dr. Funda Goldman. I'm a naturopathic physician. And in today's talk, I was going to discuss homeopathy for being overbearing. And this is specifically about the Bach Flower remedy vine. So let's go ahead. A note beforehand, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. For any symptoms that persist or worsen, please consult with a qualified medical professional. It's always best to determine the root cause of any disease and to develop a comprehensive treatment plan, of which homeopathy can be a part. And while homeopathy or Bach flower remedies can be very effective, they may not be appropriate for everyone or as a single therapy. So please keep all this in mind. Okay, so let's just give a short background on Bach flower remedies if you're not familiar. So Bach flower remedies are considered to be a type of homeopathy, which is a whole medical paradigm, an energy medical paradigm. So, if you want more background and history on either Bach flower remedies or homeopathy, I would check out my first Bach flower remedy video, Walnut, New Beginnings. But the general concept here is that disease stems from an inner struggle. Okay. And so I found that the Bach flower remedies are particularly helpful for mental, emotional, and spiritual conditions. So, kind of the stuff that's really hard to touch and get at a lot of times. And then for more videos like this, you can check out my Bach flower and homeopathy playlist. But the keynote symptom for Vine is this kind of a domineering behavior, not even kind of a pretty obvious domineering behavior. And the inner state of being that's the conflict here is that the capabilities of somebody are being used at service of self instead of for humanity or the divine. All right, so let's get into more detail here. Okay, so Vine symptoms might be very obvious to others, especially. And so, actually, because of the symptoms that you'll see, the issue may be is that even if you identify very clearly a person experiencing a Vine state, is that they may not be interested in changing things. So let's talk about it. So, somebody in a Vine state is somebody who comes across as being quite hard, unyielding, and maybe possibly greedy for power. You don't often find them respecting others. They can be quite dismissive, even potentially aggressive, where they're, imposing their will on others. They can be very demanding of self and others, and in this respect, they lack boundaries. They may be a very strong and successful leader, but to what end? I mean, we could be talking about potentially dictators here, tyrants, bullies, that sort of thing. So, they are quite ambitious. They might be at the top of their field. Again, they might be quite successful. They have very strong willpower, a very strong mind, very controlling. They can be quite arrogant and feel superior to others and be egoistic. Sometimes they may feel like they're above reproach, so that the kind of regular rules and regulations don't apply to them. They can be quite ruthless and lack empathy. It's kind of this, their way or the highway type mentality. Inflexibility, cruelty can be a part of this as well if it's really imbalance, really deep of an imbalance here. This kind of win at all cost type mentality as well. Which can also point towards, so even though on the surface um, there may be this really harsh and demanding and inflexible behavior, sometimes the deeper issue is actually a lack of self worth. So the reason why somebody's so adamant or focused on winning, regardless of injury to self or others, is that they don't feel because all of their self-esteem and self-worth is derived from winning. So that, that's kind of a potentially a deeper layer to all of this behavior, outward behavior. They tend to rule, if they are in charge, they tend to rule by fear instead of love and inspiration. And it's kind of this beat others or be beaten type mentality as well, which can be a learned behavior, especially if somebody grew up in an abusive household. Typically, there's somebody who's the abuser, and then there's usually the enabler. And so, especially when kids are growing up and they can't really process well or kind of see the larger picture here, um, they might decide, do I want to be more like the abuser, who at least is not getting abused even though they're cruel, or do I want to be more like the enabler, where I'm not cruel, but I'm getting beat to a pulp, mentally, emotionally, physically, or what have you. So it could also be, this kind of behavior can be an outcropping of that kind of early learned behavior. So the caution here is that this kind of person could potentially be dangerous to self and others. So we could be talking about psychopaths here, narcissists here, people involved in self-harm even. So again, all of this inflexibility is not always necessarily directed at others. It often is, but it could be somebody who's just driving themselves so hard that, like I remember I had a friend who was a postdoc student at Harvard, and apparently their boss, they were in a biology lab, a research lab. Apparently their boss was found um, in the middle of the night, unconscious on the floor or something, because they were just so driving themselves, you know, to to points of like, passing out. That's how hard they were driving themselves. And so my friend also went through a major depressive episode because, as hardworking as he was, I mean, his boss was even more demanding, strict, and probably unreasonable. So, yeah, you can see that kind of stuff coming up. So the risk here is that, again, if this behavior isn't corrected or addressed on a deeper level, it can be quite destructive of self and others, and abuse goodwill, and just generally be abusive of self and others. And the potential outcome of taking a remedy like this is that they would use their powers, because they usually have quite a bit of intelligence. They have a strong mind. They have a strong will. But it's almost like, in the superhero movies, it's like, are you going to use your powers for the purposes of good or evil? So, with this kind of remedy, the more egoistic, self gratifying aims are that these qualities are used for, because clearly there's some strength in here and power here. But with this kind of remedy, they could potentially, again, if they're not too far gone, because again, some people are so damaged, frankly, that this kind of remedy may not be sufficient to touch that kind of thing if there's a deep, psychological pathology. But you could potentially try if they allow you to, because again, based on this behavior, you see they probably would not be interested, or they might get offended, or they might say, I'm good as I am, and I like being the way I am. I could see that kind of response coming forward from somebody like this in this kind of state. And so they would use their all these qualities, which are neutral, and use them for purposes of good and for the greater good. Um, and also, like, they would realize that, because part of the ego drive here is that they think that they're doing all this because of themselves, when actually all of these qualities that they have, they're being misused, are actually a gift of the divine. And so, because that they were gifts given from a higher power, they should be returned in positive ways through the betterment of humanity. So it's not that the gifts shift, but the focus and how they're used, and the reasons and the goals that they're used for shifts. And because of this, they may actually derive even more personal power, because it's like that might kind of open the path to more energy. And again, if they start using um, these qualities, these skills, for like bridge building and alliance forming and stuff like this, they might get even more power, because then people would support them instead of avoid them, or just handle them best they can out of fear or need. They would actually want to work with this person. So this would be, again, the outcome here with this type of remedy might be more of an inclusive leader, a team player, and also a leader who builds up other leaders. Because typically a person like this, they want to be like, head honcho, the big cheese. They want to be in charge. They don't want any, they want to eliminate their competition, so to speak. Um, I have actually used this remedy for somebody, he was a fairly young guy in his 20s, and he actually was quite domineering of his girlfriend at the time. And he admitted it, um, and he was open to taking this remedy, which surprised me. And he said, after taking the remedy for just even a few weeks or something, that he was seeing himself being softening up a bit and being more, um, sort of diplomatic and inclusive and considering her more and hearing her out more and like them making decisions together as a couple rather than him just imposing his thoughts. And sometimes that, again, that can then be another type of learned behavior. Not that I don't think he was abusing her, but again, sometimes that kind of relationship dynamic is learned in childhood of just or sometimes in certain cultures, like it doesn't always have to be men; it can be women as well. But like there's that's the only version of strength that they know, somebody who's just dominating other people. Um, and yeah, but and even his aunt, who I think referred him to me, like when I met her a few months back, she's like, "Wow, he's changed so much," yeah, yeah, I don't know, luckily or not luckily, unluckily, I haven't had to deal with people who had such deep pathology that I was fearful for myself, or other people, but maybe depending on what kind of clientele you're working with here. So, there are a bunch of potentially other remedies to consider if somebody's displaying some, quite extreme domineering behavior. And again, some of this is about similar behavior or other things that where people are in kind of an extreme mode of behavior of accomplishing things at the expense of themselves or others. And some of these remedies here are based on like the deeper issues, like what's really driving this person deep, if you really pop the hood of the car and look deep in the engine, like what's really driving somebody. So holly might be, and most of these remedies, when you see a double asterisk next to these remedies, that means I have a video on them, so you can look them up. And I think I've done most of the Bach Flower remedies. I have a few more to do, but we have a few more. So holly, Bach Flower is a possibility. Holly is for kind of like a Scrooge-like person who's um, maybe not domineering, but pretty grumpy, if nothing else, and kind of kind of selfish in a different way. They're kind of like, leave me alone and I'll leave you alone type mentality. But Holly is for people who are not recognizing the support that life is offering them. Like they're so focused on receiving, support or love from whoever or whatever in a certain way that they're ignoring all the other ways that support is coming into their life. And so they get focused on the lack instead of focusing on the abundance in their life. Some of these, I have a video on remedies for exhaustion and overwhelm. And again, this is a different kind of presentation. But you can see here, like elm, I talk about elm, hornbeam, oak, and olive, and it's 4 different remedies under this umbrella of exhaustion and overwhelm. And you can see here, like elm, this is for people who identify too much with their role. And so they'll drive themselves too hard because of that, because of their again, their, I'm a whatever doctor, lawyer, head of this, head of that, or whatever, and because they're just fixed on that and they assume a lot of responsibility, that's why they're driving usually themselves more than others. So you can differentiate that. Hornbeam is for excessive mental effort. So this is like even students and stuff who are, studying too much and then they feel overwhelmed or exhausted. Then there's oak. So this could be another one. This is kind of like rigid perseverance. So um, this is like for people who are stuck on a goal, fixated on a goal, and will not give up no matter what. Even if the goal is no longer relevant or of use, they'll just kind of keep going and keep going. So, again, you have to just differentiate between is this person domineering, because this oak person isn't necessarily domineering. but they might be driving themselves because they're kind of too rigid in terms of achieving certain goals. So you can see how there's nuances here. And then olive is for people who just overwork themselves for too long and they're just exhausted, which can be, again, another remedy that the vine person needs, or again, just to differentiate some of these Bach flowers. Then there's white chestnut, and this is for people who are obsessive. So the energy here tends to be more internal, where it's more like analysis paralysis. So this kind of person might be very obsessed about goals and things like that, but their energy will be more internal rather than potentially domineering others. But again, there might be an obsessive, piece to this kind of scenario. Then there's Vervain. This is for people who are just overzealous and supporting a cause. So maybe it's like a political cause or social cause or something like this, and they just kind of um, overdo it and actually scare people away. They're not necessarily so it might seem like they're overbearing, but again, they're kind of driving too hard for some kind of cause, and it might again scare people away for again sort of similar but different reasons here. Then there's pine. This can be people who blame themselves for something. And so maybe the reason why somebody's driving themselves and others so hard is they feel guilty or shameful about something. So it's kind of more these negative emotions that are driving this outward, you know, uh, you know, excessive behavior, demanding behavior. Then there's rock water. I don't have a video on this yet, but rock water people are just very rigid, and so they're hard to move. But they won't necessarily project this energy onto others. It's just they will be, it's almost like the problem is other people have absolutely no influence on being able to kind of soften this person because they're so stuck in their ways. Crabapple, this is another one I haven't done yet, but crabapple people can be quite perfectionist. But this is kind of like um, more like an internal critic type of energy where they feel so much self-disgust that they keep trying to run away from this feeling by being perfect. And, there's no end to that. And, what's the definition of perfect anyway? That's pretty subjective. Then there's remedies for neediness, which might seem kind of, askew, but in this video that I did for neediness, one of the remedies I discussed was chicory, which is for the needy mother. So in this case, and it doesn't have to be a mother, but like some sort of guiding figure. This is just the kind of short term version just to make it stick in your head. But this is somebody who like kind of controls others by actually um, doing favors for them and making them feel indebted to them and stuff like that. So that's kind of, it can be if that chicory energy gets extreme, it could seem like domineering behavior, like because this needy mother type situation could be like, well, I did this and this for you, and so you owe me. So there is this kind of controlling nature to this chicory remedy. Um, Also, remedies for self-confidence, because again, if this person in the vine state is driving themselves and others so hard to win, because winning is the only thing that gives them self-esteem, then maybe they need to, take Serato, which is for trusting intuition, because maybe it's an endless goal, and whatever the goal is in terms of winning, and maybe they're not trusting their intuition, like maybe some other path would make them happier if they listen to that rather than being in their head. And then Larch might be another one, which usually demonstrates a little bit differently than the vine person. Large people actually this is almost the opposite in some ways. Large people may not be in positions of authority because they feel inferior, so they never even take a chance of putting themselves in the position. Like they may never apply for a promotion or something because they don't feel like they deserve it, or they feel like others are better than them. So it's almost like the opposite of Vine. So the other thing is, while I was going through this talk, and there's some other potential natural medicine remedies that could be helpful if you're dealing with somebody who is experiencing or demonstrating a lot of domineering behavior. So there's a lot of classic homeopathy as well, and two remedies that came to mind for different reasons. Just immediately, there are many others, I'm sure, but lycopodium came to mind because lycopodium, there is this kind of dual nature to lycopodium where sometimes they seem fearful, and other times they can be really domineering and like a bully. So lycopodium came to mind. Again, you'd have to assess, which one is more appropriate or really fits the case better. The other remedy that came to mind is Staphysagria. Staphysagria I've used in many occasions for people who have been abused, um, of whether in childhood or on the street or something. And what I find sometimes, like there's this one case that comes to mind. I had a case actually way back in medical school. The woman I was dealing with, she was a therapist. I think she was close to 40 years of age at the time. And she had been through therapy herself for many years, and so was very aware of her mental processes and triggers and all this sort of thing. Because she'd gone through with a fine-tooth comb, both through with herself and then her therapist. And but she still could not prevent a certain thing from happening in her life. So she was actually, unfortunately, sexually assaulted in middle school, and because of that, had some probably suppressed and misplaced anger. And so, what she would experience in her life as an adult, way beyond this particular event, is she would get into a personal relationship with a person, and then she would get close to them and draw them in. And then once they kind of let their guard down, she would do something fairly nasty to hurt them and drive them away and sabotage the relationship. And she knew this, but she couldn't control it. She couldn't stop this from happening. So, and so I thought, well, this could very well be this, misplaced, misdirected anger from, this sexual assault way back when, because that often happens. I've seen with people. So I gave her the Staphysagria, and then within a year, she was in a new relationship, and within 2 years, she had moved in with the guy, and within 3 years, they were married. So sometimes, again, it's like for her, I don't know if she would have come across as like a vine person, maybe to the person she was in a relationship with. And sometimes, people hide it pretty well, like maybe if they're really, like psychopathic, like, they can, on the surface, they seem all sweet and nice, and then, behind closed doors, it's a whole different story. So they could be very two-faced that way. But, so again, but the Staphysagria type remedy is more for, actually more fear and anger and these other things that are suppressed from previous traumas, and that's what's driving the behavior more than this person is truly like, egotistical and narcissistic or whatever. So some other ideas, because again, just to kind of get more of a broad take on this whole issue of domineering behavior and what's driving it, because that's the key with any of these remedies is what's really driving this behavior. Then from an Ayurvedic point of view, so Ayurveda is traditional Indian medicine. In that paradigm, which is also more of an energy paradigm, basically people in states of health and disease, and whether physical or mental, emotional, are seen essentially as too much wind, too much fire, and too much earth. So when people have too much fire or pitta energy, there's a lot of fire. They can have a very strong mind. They can be very organized. They can be very goal oriented. So you can see how this is like, very similar to this kind of description of the vine state. They can be very rigid. They can be dominating of self. They can be angry, irritated. They can't, if they're really out of balance, they can be violent and abusive. So from an Ayurvedic point of view, the vine person would have a lot of pitta, a lot of fire. So, if you look on my channel for the pitta remedies, or there's like a pitta fire diet. There's also a whole playlist on Ayurveda and all the things related to pitta, like beverages and nutrition and that sort of thing. That may be helpful. in perhaps in combination with something like vine. The other thing is, again, if on a deeper level, maybe on the surface they seem very pitta, but again, on a deeper level, if what's really driving them is fear and anxiety because they're not living up to some image that they have, then there could also be excess vata or wind energy. So that might also be another one you'd have to kind of assess the person if you do Ayurveda. That a divine person might be like just pure, like hardcore, excess pitta fire type. But usually most people are not just a pure fire, wind, or earth energy. Usually there's a mix. Um, so there could be, too much vata or wind. The other thing is there could be too much earth where they're just like stuck. So sometimes I see um, people who are like like the fire wind people are usually like just all over the place, totally like can be scattered, can be overwhelmed, can go through sort of crash and burn cycles. But then we also have like the fire earth people, and those people, they not only have the mental strength and willpower, but then they have the endurance of the earth person. So I've seen plenty of fire earth people who just like workaholic types, completely driving themselves. Like one woman comes to mind, one of my patients, she's a fire earth type, complete workaholic for years. Um, I mean, I don't see her as a vine person, but just to give you like, an example of a fire earth person. Um, but worked long hours, really took time off. Like she had problems following any treatment plan because she just kept prioritizing work over pretty much everything else, even her own health. And then and then she went through a couple of major life events. She lost her husband suddenly, unexpectedly, and that threw her for a loop. Um and kind of slowed her down a little bit, but her response to the grief of losing her husband was to work harder. And that lasted a while. And then she got diagnosed with breast cancer and she couldn't work. And then she didn't work for like a good year, maybe 2 years, because she was dealing with all these health issues because it was like an extended process because she had all these complications and stuff. And then at the end, she's like, wow, it took all this, to finally get me to slow down. you know? So I was like, well, at least there was some insight. And she's like, I don't, I was like, she's like, what was I thinking all these years? Like, why was I working this hard for what? So sometimes people get into these modes and they don't even know what's driving them. And they don't question what's driving them. So, if you do stumble upon somebody who's in this state and maybe questioning, reflecting a little bit, then you might have an opening to help this person move to a more balanced way of going through life. So, okay, so vine and some other remedies you might consider, in parallel or kind of instead of, depending on what the person presents with. All right, so as always, I want to thank you for your time and stopping by. I appreciate all the support you give the channel, whether it's listening to a video or subscribing or liking videos or sharing videos. I'm always amazed at how many shares for especially this channel I get, which is like, a really deep compliment, I feel. Some people send in very generous donations. So, all these different ways that all of you support the channel and my work, I really appreciate. I do have another YouTube channel on Vedic astrology, ancient Indian astrology, if you're interested in that. It's called Light Vedic Astrology. And a lot of I would say the majority of the photography in my talks, my videos are photographs I've taken. I have an online photography gallery and gift shop. So if that's interesting too, if you're into photography, you might be interested in that as well. And I've got the link here for you as well. All right. So, as always, I hope you found this helpful and useful and interesting to you. And until the next one, take care.